14 FBI helicopters thunder low over Houston's skyline just after 9 p.m. Residents think it's a training exercise, unaware they're watching the opening move in the largest Cosa Nostra takedown in Texas history. It is Friday, November 1st, 2024, 9:06 p.m., and the airspace above the energy corridor on Houston's west side becomes a chessboard. Pilots from the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group, flying in staggered formations of Blackhawks and Bells, track 12 GPS beacons hidden in luxury watches, dashboard ornaments, and even a child's keychain. Those trackers sit on the wrists and in the cars of 89 Cosa Nostra operatives converging on a gated estate off Memorial Drive, a 6,800-square-foot home quietly purchased 3 years earlier through a Delaware LLC. Neighbors think the catered event is an oil and gas fundraiser. The truth is far more dangerous. Inside the Houston field office on the northwest side of the city, a situation room glows with live drone feeds, cell phone intercepts, and a digital seating chart showing every chair at the long dining table. At the center of it all, an undercover asset, codenamed Santo, a man with 27 years inside the life, now wearing a wire inside his tailored suit. As SWAT teams from 3 agencies lock in around the property, no one on the ground realizes that a single whispered phrase from Santo will trigger simultaneous entry at 14 separate locations across the city. The temperature outside is 71 degrees, humidity at 68%, wind from the southeast at 9 miles per hour. Conditions are perfect. In exactly 8 minutes and 42 seconds, everything will change. The architect, Special Agent Michael Chen. Special Agent Michael Chen doesn't look like the man who spent 4 years building the case that would bring down the largest Cosa Nostra network in Texas history. At 42 years old, standing 5'9" with wire-rimmed glasses and graying temples, he looks more like a university professor than an FBI organized crime specialist. But appearances have always been Chen's greatest asset. Born in San Francisco in 1982 to immigrant parents, his father a chemist, his mother a pediatric nurse, Michael Chen grew up in a world divided between 2 cultures. He spoke Mandarin at home, English everywhere else. He graduated UC Berkeley with a degree in criminology in 2004, then spent 2 years as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, before realizing that hunting money was less interesting than hunting the people who stole it. He joined the FBI in 2006, completed training at Quantico, and was assigned to the New York field office's Organized Crime Squad. Between 2007 and 2019, Chen worked cases involving Russian mob money laundering, Albanian trafficking rings, and Dominican drug distribution networks. He learned Italian, studied mafia history obsessively, and developed a reputation for patience. While other agents wanted quick arrests and headlines, Chen built cases like an architect designing cathedrals, slowly, precisely, with an eye toward structures that would last. Michael could look at a spreadsheet of restaurant receipts and tell you who was paying tribute to whom, his former supervisor in New York told me. He saw patterns other people couldn't see. He understood that organized crime isn't about violence, it's about economics. Violence is just the enforcement mechanism. In 2019, Chen transferred to Houston. The official reason was family. His wife Sarah had gotten a job as a cardiothoracic surgeon at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and their 2 kids needed stability. The unofficial reason was more complex. The FBI had been tracking an alarming trend. East Coast Cosa Nostra families were expanding operations into Texas, particularly Houston, using the city's massive shipping infrastructure to move everything from drugs to untaxed cigarettes to stolen luxury vehicles. Houston was perfect for organized crime. The Port of Houston was the busiest in the United States by tonnage. The city had no zoning laws, making it easy to hide illegal operations inside legitimate businesses. The population was transient, multicultural, and growing rapidly. 8.2 million people in the metro area, many of them new arrivals who didn't ask questions. And most importantly, law enforcement attention was focused on Mexican cartels and MS-13, not the Italian-American mafia that most people thought had died with John Gotti. Chen saw an opportunity. In January 2020, he approached the special agent in charge of the Houston field office with a proposal. Give him 3 years and a small team, and he would map the entire Cosa Nostra presence in Texas. No quick arrests, no press conferences, just old-fashioned investigative work, Surveillance, financial analysis, confidential informants, and patience. The SAC approved. Chen assembled a team of 8 agents, all specialists, 2 financial analysts, 2 surveillance experts, 2 tactical operators, 1 tech specialist, and 1 linguist who spoke Italian and Sicilian dialect. They called themselves the Quiet Squad, a deliberate contrast to the high-profile task forces that dominated bureau culture. For 11 months, they worked in obscurity. They tracked wire transfers. They photographed license plates outside social clubs in Brooklyn and Newark. They identified shell companies and traced them back to their beneficial owners. They built family trees showing relationships going back 3 generations. They identified captains, soldiers, associates. They learned who owed money to whom, who had old grudges, who was rising in the ranks. And then, in December 2020, they caught a break. A bookmaker in Baytown, a refinery town east of Houston, got arrested for domestic violence. Standard procedure. Local police searched his apartment, found betting slips, turned the case over to the FBI. The bookmaker was small-time, running maybe $15,000 in action per week on NFL games. But when Chen's financial analyst ran the numbers, she found something interesting. The bookmaker was paying tribute to someone. $300 per week, every week, transferred through Venmo to an account registered to a woman in Queens, New York. Chen recognized the name. Maria Castellano, 64 years old, sister of Anthony Castellano, a captain in the Gambino crime family. Anthony had been indicted twice, convicted once, served 4 years in federal prison. Now he was supposedly retired, living off his late wife's pension. But Chen knew better. Maria was a pass-through. The money was going to Anthony, who was using his sister's account to avoid federal monitoring. Chen pulled Anthony's file. Between 2015 and 2019, Anthony had made 7 trips to Houston. Each trip lasted 3 to 5 days. Each trip coincided with meetings at Italian restaurants, social clubs, and private homes. Surveillance photos from those trips showed Anthony meeting with at least 15 different individuals, some with known mob ties, others appearing to be legitimate businessmen. Chen realized what was happening. Anthony Castellano wasn't retired. He was building something, and Houston was his construction site. Over the next 2 years, Chen's team expanded their investigation. They identified 43 bookmakers across Houston, Beaumont, Corpus Christi, and San Antonio, all paying tribute up the chain. They traced shipments of stolen cigarettes coming through the port of Houston, each container worth $300,000 in untaxed merchandise. They documented illegal gambling operations, loan sharking networks, and labor racketeering schemes in the construction industry. They found Cosa Nostra fingerprints on union corruption, healthcare fraud, and diesel fuel tax evasion. But more importantly, they discovered something unprecedented. 4 different crime families were operating in Houston simultaneously. The Gambinos, the Lucchese's, the Colombos, and a smaller Philadelphia family, all running parallel operations, all paying tribute back to New York. It was a violation of traditional mafia protocol, which respected territorial boundaries. Someone had brokered a peace deal, dividing Houston into zones of influence. Chen needed to know who. And more importantly, he needed to catch all of them at once. If he arrested members of one family, the others would disappear. He needed them together, in one place, at one time. That opportunity came in August 2024, when one of Chen's confidential informants, a low-level associate who had been cooperating for 18 months, reported that a major meeting was being planned for early November. Not just captains, but bosses. Not just one family, but all 4. The purpose: to resolve a dispute over control of the Houston shipping channels, where container traffic had increased by 34% since 2020. Chen saw his moment. He went to Washington, briefed the deputy director, and requested authorization for a major operation. The FBI approved and assigned resources, tactical teams, aviation support, and coordination with local law enforcement, including the Houston Police Department, Harris County Sheriff's Office, and Texas Department of Public Safety. But Chen needed one more element: someone inside the room, someone who could confirm identities, record conversations, and signal when everyone had arrived. He needed Santo, the insider, Vincent "Vinny" Marchese. Vincent Marchese, was 51 years old when he agreed to become a confidential informant for the FBI. It was March 2023, and he was facing 15 years in federal prison for racketeering, loan sharking, and conspiracy to commit murder. He had three choices: plead guilty and spend his 60s behind bars, go to trial and probably lose, or cooperate. He chose cooperation. Vinny was born in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn in 1973. His father ran a small bakery on 18th Avenue. His uncle was a made man in the Colombo family. Vinny grew up in the life, not as a gangster, but as a kid who knew gangsters. He watched them at weddings and funerals. He saw the respect they commanded. He saw the money they made. And somewhere around age 16, he decided he wanted in. He started small, running errands, delivering messages, collecting debts. He was good at it, reliable, discreet, smart enough to know when to talk and when to stay quiet. By 22, he was earning $2,000 per week. By 30, he was a full associate with the Colombo family, running a loan sharking operation that grossed $400,000 annually. Vinny was never flashy. He didn't wear gold chains or drive Ferraris. He lived in a modest house in Staten Island with his wife and 2 daughters. He paid his taxes on his legitimate income as a construction consultant. He coached Little League. He went to church. He looked like every other middle-aged Italian-American guy in New York. But he was also enforcing debts with threats of violence, charging 150% interest on illegal loans, and paying tribute to a captain who reported to a boss who sat on the Colombo family's ruling panel. He had committed crimes. He had hurt people. And in 2022, an FBI wiretap caught him on tape discussing the murder of a debtor who had tried to run. The murder never happened. The debtor paid before violence became necessary. But conspiracy was enough. The FBI arrested Vinny in January 2023, and his lawyer delivered the news. The evidence was overwhelming. The charges were federal, and the sentencing guidelines were harsh. Vinny was looking at 180 months minimum. Special Agent Michael Chen flew to New York personally to meet with Vinny. The meeting took place in a secure room at 26 Federal Plaza, the FBI's New York headquarters. Chen brought files, photographs, and recordings. He laid out the case methodically, and then he made an offer. "I don't need you to testify," Chen said. "I don't need you to wear a wire against your captain. I need you to tell me what's happening in Houston." Vinny looked confused. Houston? He'd never even been to Texas. Chen explained. The Colombo family was expanding operations in Houston, along with 3 other families. Vinny's captain, Frank Amato, was overseeing the Colombo operations, which meant Vinny had access to information. Chen didn't need Vinny to become a rat in the traditional sense. He needed Vinny to become an analyst, providing context and intelligence that would help the FBI understand Cosa Nostra's Texas strategy. Vinny hesitated. Cooperation meant becoming everything he'd been raised to despise. But it also meant seeing his daughters graduate high school. It meant growing old outside prison walls. It meant, perhaps, a chance at redemption. He agreed. For 8 months, Vinny met with Chen every 2 weeks. He explained organizational structures. He identified individuals in photographs. He translated coded language from wiretaps. He described how decisions were made, how disputes were resolved, how money flowed up the chain. He wasn't betraying specific people. He was teaching Chen how to think like a mobster. And then, in October 2023, Vinny heard something that changed everything. His captain mentioned a sit-down being planned for Houston, a major meeting to resolve territorial disputes. All 4 families would send representatives. It was unprecedented, and it represented exactly the opportunity Chen had been waiting for. Chen made Vinny an offer: go to Houston, attend the meeting as his captain's representative, and wear a wire. In exchange, the government would recommend time served plus probation. Vinny would avoid prison entirely. Vinny agreed, but with one condition. After this was over, he wanted witness protection. Not because he feared his former associates, though he did, but because he wanted a clean break. He wanted to disappear, start over, become someone else. Chen promised to make it happen. For the next 6 months, Vinny prepared. He stayed in regular contact with his captain, maintaining his cover. He traveled to Houston twice on legitimate business, scouting the city and establishing himself as his captain's eyes in Texas. He met with other associates, building relationships and gathering information that he passed to Chen. And in early October 2024, the invitation came, November 1st, a private estate in Houston's energy corridor. All captains and acting bosses were expected to attend. The purpose was to finalize an agreement dividing control of Houston's port operations, construction unions, and gambling networks. It would be the most significant gathering of Cosa Nostra leadership in decades. Vinny confirmed his attendance. Chen began planning the operation. The gathering storm. On October 15, 2024, Special Agent Chen assembled his full task force for the first time. The room in the Houston field office contained 47 people: FBI agents, Houston police officers, Harris County deputies, Texas Rangers, federal prosecutors, and technical specialists. On the wall, Chen had pinned a massive organizational chart showing 89 individuals connected by red lines indicating relationships, blue lines indicating financial transactions, and black lines indicating criminal conspiracies. Chen spent 4 hours briefing the team. He explained the history, the players, the stakes. He showed surveillance footage, played audio recordings, and walked through financial spreadsheets. He explained that November 1st represented a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Every major player would be in one location, at one time, with evidence of their conspiracy captured on tape. The plan was complex but elegant. Santo, Vinny Marchese, would enter the meeting wearing a sophisticated recording device built into his belt buckle. The device would transmit audio to a receiver in a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away. Once Santo confirmed that all targets had arrived and begun discussing criminal activity, he would give a verbal signal. "I need some air." That phrase would trigger simultaneous operations at 14 locations across Houston. At the estate, tactical teams would execute a forced entry using breaching charges and flashbang grenades. At 13 other locations, homes, social clubs, and businesses associated with the Cosa Nostra network, agents would execute search warrants and arrest warrants simultaneously. The helicopter component was Chen's innovation. Traditional surveillance relied on ground units, but ground units could be spotted. Helicopters provided mobile, aerial observation that could track vehicles, monitor the perimeter, and provide tactical support if needed. Chen requested 14 helicopters, 4 from the FBI's Houston field office, 6 from the Department of Homeland Security, and 4 from the Harris County Sheriff's Office. The helicopters would stage at 3 different locations starting at 8:00 p.m. on November 1st. At 8:45 p.m. they would begin converging on the energy corridor, flying at 1,500 feet to minimize noise. By 9:00 p.m. they would be in position, circling in a loose formation that would tighten on command. Chen knew the helicopters would draw attention. Houston residents would notice. Social media would light up with speculation. But he calculated that the targets inside the estate would dismiss it as police activity or medical transport. By the time they realized what was happening, it would be too late. The tactical entry teams trained for 2 weeks at a facility outside Houston. They practiced breaching doors, clearing rooms, and securing subjects without casualties. They studied blueprints of the estate, identifying entry points, choke points, and potential defensive positions. They rehearsed scenarios: armed resistance, hostage situations, attempted escapes. The estate itself presented challenges. Purchased in 2021 through a Delaware LLC traced back to a Gambino associate, the property sat on 2.3 acres surrounded by an 8-foot privacy fence. The main house was 6,800 square feet with reinforced doors, security cameras, and a state-of-the-art alarm system. The property had one main entrance off Memorial Drive and a service entrance at the rear. Both would need to be breached simultaneously. Intelligence indicated that approximately 15 armed drivers would be waiting outside in vehicles parked along the circular driveway. Each driver likely carried at least one handgun, possibly more. Securing the exterior would require overwhelming force applied instantly. Chen assigned 42 tactical operators to the estate, 12 for the main entry team, 12 for the rear entry team, and 18 for the exterior perimeter. Each operator wore full tactical gear, carried an M4 rifle, and had less lethal options including tasers and pepper spray. The goal was 0 casualties, subjects and officers alike. Meanwhile, the technical team prepared the surveillance equipment. Santo's recording device was tested 37 times to ensure reliability. Backup recording systems were installed in the surveillance van. Drone operators prepared 4 small quadcopter drones, equipped with thermal cameras and spotlight capability. The legal team prepared the paperwork: 89 arrest warrants, 14 search warrants, and seizure orders for 26 vehicles and 11 bank accounts. Federal prosecutors had already drafted a 174-page indictment, charging all 89 subjects with RICO conspiracy, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a law specifically designed to prosecute organized crime. On October 28th, Chen received confirmation. The meeting was still scheduled for November 1st at 8 p.m. Santo reported that his captain had purchased a plane ticket from Newark to Houston, departing October 31st. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Chen slept poorly that week. He kept running scenarios in his mind, looking for flaws. What if Santo's wire failed? What if the subjects swept for recording devices? What if someone didn't show up? What if someone brought more armed guards than expected? What if? But Chen had learned something during 18 years with the FBI. Perfect operations don't exist. You plan for contingencies, you train your people, and you trust your preparation. Fear is healthy. It keeps you sharp. But paralysis is deadly. On October 30th, Chen held his final briefing. He looked around the room at faces he'd worked with for 4 years. Some of these agents had mortgages and kids. Some were young and hungry. All of them were putting their careers and possibly their lives on the line for this operation. Tomorrow night, Chen said, we're going to do something historic. We're going to dismantle the largest Cosa Nostra network in Texas. Some of these guys have been operating for 30 years. They think they're untouchable. They think Texas belongs to them. We're going to prove them wrong. Stay focused. Stay safe. And remember, this isn't about us. This is about the victims, the people they extorted, the businesses they destroyed, the communities they corrupted. We're speaking for people who can't speak for themselves. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone joined. It wasn't about ego. It was about purpose. Before we continue, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city and state in the comments. This story happened in Houston, but organized crime operates everywhere in America. From New York to Los Angeles, from Miami to Seattle. I want to know where this channel reaches, and I want to hear your thoughts throughout this investigation. Act 2. The Operation. The Convergence, November 1st, 2024, began like any other Friday in Houston. The temperature reached 82 degrees by noon. Traffic on I-10 was heavy but moving. The city's 8.2 million residents went about their business, working, shopping, eating lunch, picking up kids from school. Nobody knew that by midnight the criminal landscape of Texas would be fundamentally altered. At 2 p.m., Vincent Marchese, Santo, checked into a Hampton Inn near the Galleria, paying cash for a room he wouldn't sleep in. He showered, shaved, and put on the suit he'd brought from New York. Charcoal gray, Italian wool, custom-tailored. In the bathroom mirror, he looked at himself and barely recognized the man staring back. 27 years in the life, and it was ending tonight, one way or another. At 3 p.m., he met Special Agent Chen in a parking garage 3 blocks from the FBI field office. Chen brought the recording device, a belt buckle containing a microphone, transmitter, and 6-hour battery. The buckle looked completely normal, brushed steel, simple design, the kind of thing you'd buy at Macy's. But it contained $45,000 worth of surveillance technology. Chen attached the buckle to Vinny's belt and tested the transmission. In the surveillance van parked 1 level down, a technician confirmed. Audio quality was excellent, transmission was strong, battery was full. "How you feeling?" Chen asked. Vinny shrugged. "Like I'm about to commit suicide. You're doing the right thing. I'm betraying everyone I ever knew." Chen didn't argue. There was truth in what Vinny said. "You're also saving lives," Chen said. "These guys aren't businessmen. They're predators. They destroy people." Vinny nodded, but his expression didn't change. "What happens after tonight?" "We extract you immediately. You'll be in federal custody by midnight. Witness protection takes over from there. New identity, new location. You'll disappear." "What about my family?" Your wife and daughters are already in protective custody. They flew to a secure location this morning. You'll be reunited tomorrow." Vinny closed his eyes. His wife thought he was on a business trip. His daughters thought he'd be home Sunday. None of them knew the truth, that their lives were about to change forever, that they'd have to leave everything behind. Friends, relatives, memories. "I need you focused," Chen said. "When you walk into that house tonight, you can't be thinking about afterward. You have one job: act natural, record everything, and give the signal when everyone's there. Can you do that?" Vinny opened his eyes. "Yeah, I can do that." At 5 p.m., the first subjects began arriving in Houston. A Gambino captain named Robert Catalano landed at Hobby Airport on a Southwest flight from Newark. A Lucchese soldier named James Rossetti drove in from Dallas in a rented BMW. A Colombo associate named Anthony Greco arrived from New Orleans by car. FBI surveillance teams tracked each arrival, photographing vehicles, documenting movements. By 6:30 p.m., surveillance had confirmed 73 of the 89 expected subjects were already in the Houston area. Some checked into hotels, others went directly to the estate. All of them were being watched. At 7 p.m., the helicopter teams began staging. 4 FBI helicopters lifted off from Ellington Field, a joint military-civilian airport southeast of Houston. 6 Homeland Security helicopters departed from a facility near the port. 4 Harris County Sheriff's helicopters launched from a helipad behind their downtown headquarters. The pilots were all veterans, former military with thousands of flight hours. They'd been briefed extensively on the operation. Maintain altitude at 1,500 feet, circle in wide patterns, avoid drawing attention until the signal. When the signal came, they'd drop to 800 feet and tighten the circle around the target location. At 7:45 p.m., tactical teams began moving into position. The main entry team assembled in a warehouse 2 miles from the target estate. They performed final equipment checks: body armor, helmets, rifles, breaching charges, flashbangs, zip tie restraints, medical kits. Each operator knew his role. Each operator had rehearsed this dozens of times. The rear entry team staged in a residential neighborhood backing up to the target property. They wore plain clothes over their tactical gear to avoid suspicion. They'd approach through a green belt, cut through the rear fence, and wait for the signal. The perimeter team split into 6 groups of 3, positioning vehicles at key intersections around the estate. Their job was to prevent escape. Any vehicle leaving the property would be stopped immediately. At 8 p.m., Vincent Marchese arrived at the estate in an Uber. He'd been instructed not to drive his own car; it was too risky. The Uber driver, a retired school teacher working evenings for extra money, dropped Vinny at the front gate and drove away, never knowing she'd just delivered a confidential informant to the most significant organized crime operation in Texas history. Vinny pressed the intercom button. A voice answered in Italian. "Chi è?" "Marchese. Rappresento Amato." "Marchese. I represent Amato." The gate buzzed open. Vinny walked up a curved driveway lined with palm trees and Italian cypress. The estate looked more like a resort than a private home. Manicured lawns, accent lighting, a fountain in the circular drive. Parked along the driveway were 17 luxury vehicles: Mercedes, BMWs, Cadillacs, 1 Maserati. Standing near the cars were the drivers, young men in leather jackets and dark shirts smoking cigarettes and talking quietly. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, stepped forward as Vinny approached. "You carrying?" "No." The kid patted him down anyway, professional, thorough, checking jacket pockets, waistband, ankles. He found Vinny's phone and held it up questioningly. "I need to keep that," Vinny said. The kid looked toward the house. Someone nodded. The kid returned the phone and stepped aside. Vinny walked to the front door. It opened before he could knock. A man in his 60s, gray hair slicked back, wearing a black shirt and gold watch, looked Vinny up and down. "Vinny Marchese. Been a while." Vinny recognized him. Carlo Messina, a Gambino captain from Queens. They'd met twice before, years ago, at weddings. "Carlo, good to see you. Frank inside?" "Not yet. Traffic from the airport." Carlo stepped aside. Vinny entered. The interior was what you'd expect from a house purchased with ill-gotten wealth: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, Renaissance paintings that were probably fake but expensive enough to look real. The living room had been converted into a conference space with a long table that could seat 20. About 30 men stood around the room, talking in small groups, drinking espresso and wine. Vinny recognized some faces from surveillance photos Chen had shown him. There was Vincent Romano, a Lucchese captain from New Jersey. There was Michael DeLuca, a Colombo soldier from Brooklyn. There was Anthony Scarpelli, an aging Philadelphia family representative who walked with a cane. Vinny's heart was pounding. His mouth was dry. He reminded himself to breathe normally, act natural, be the person he'd pretended to be for 27 years. He accepted a glass of wine from a server, a young woman in a white shirt and black vest who was almost certainly not aware she was serving dinner to organized crime figures. At 8:15 p.m., Vinny's captain, Frank Amato, arrived. Frank was 58, heavyset, with a thick New York accent, and a face that had seen its share of violence. He spotted Vinny across the room and walked over. "Everything good?" Frank asked. "Yeah, just got here. This is important tonight. We're settling a lot of business. These guys from Philly been causing problems. We need to straighten things out." Vinny nodded. "I understand." Frank clapped him on the shoulder and moved toward a group of older men near the fireplace. Vinny drifted to the edge of the room, positioning himself where he could observe everyone. In the surveillance van 3 blocks away, Special Agent Chen listened through headphones as Vinny's wire transmitted crystal-clear audio. Around him, 6 technicians monitored screens showing drone footage, helicopter positions, and team locations. Everything was proceeding perfectly. At 8:32 p.m., the final subjects arrived. 2 acting bosses, one from the Gambinos, one from the Lucchese's. Their arrival triggered a subtle shift in the room's energy. Conversations quieted. Men moved toward the conference table. Chen checked his watch. Almost time. The meeting. By 8:45 p.m., all 89 subjects were accounted for. 72 were inside the estate. 17 were outside, mostly drivers, plus a few security personnel. Surveillance confirmed no one was carrying long guns, though most were likely armed with handguns. Inside, the meeting began. The 2 acting bosses sat at opposite ends of the long table. Captains and senior soldiers filled the remaining chairs. Lower-level associates like Vinny stood along the walls. The Gambino acting boss, a man named Thomas Ricci, 67 years old with white hair and a gravelly voice, called the room to order. "All right, everybody shut up and sit down, we got business." The room quieted. Ricci continued. "We're here because Houston is becoming a problem. 4 families working the same territory. Nobody respecting boundaries, money going missing, people stepping on each other's toes. This ends tonight. We're going to divide this city proper, so everybody knows who works where and there's no more confusion." A Lucchese captain named Vincent Barone spoke up. "With respect, Tom, the problem isn't confusion. The problem is your guys muscling in on operations we started." Ricci's face darkened. "Our guys? Your guys been skimming off the port shipments, we got proof." "What proof?" "Container manifests. You're declaring 40% less product than what's coming through." Barone leaned forward. "Those manifests are wrong. Your guy can't count." The room tensed. This was the kind of dispute that, in an earlier era, would have been settled with violence. But tonight, cooler heads were supposed to prevail. The Lucchese acting boss, a man named Peter Gallo, 63, with gray hair and expensive glasses, raised his hand. "Gentlemen, please. We're not here to argue about the past. We're here to plan the future. Tom's right. We need structure. I propose we divide Houston into zones. Gambinos take the port operations and east side. Lucchese's take north side and gambling. Colombos take construction and unions. Philadelphia takes west side businesses." There were murmurs around the table. A Colombo captain named Luis Marino spoke. "What about the cigarette shipments?" Gallo nodded. "Cigarettes are joint. We split profits 4 ways, equal shares. No more competition, just cooperation." Ricci looked skeptical. "And what happens when someone violates the agreement?" "We handle it through sit-downs like civilized people," Gallo said. "No more unsanctioned violence. No more bodies. We're not animals." In the surveillance van, Chen felt a surge of satisfaction. They were discussing criminal enterprises openly, on tape, with specificity. Every word was evidence. Every admission was another count in the indictment. Vinny, standing against the wall, felt sweat running down his back. His wire was transmitting everything. These men, many of whom he'd known for years, were digging their own graves with every sentence, and he was the one holding the shovel. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. They discussed specific operations, which bookmakers reported to whom, how tribute would be collected, how disputes would be arbitrated. They discussed logistics, how often to meet, who would coordinate between families, how to handle law enforcement attention. And then, at 9:04 p.m., they discussed something that made Chen's blood run cold. A younger Gambino soldier named Anthony Palladino said, "What about the FBI? I heard they've been watching us." The room went silent. Ricci looked at Palladino with irritation. "Of course they're watching. FBI always watches. That's their job." "No, I mean seriously watching. I heard there's a task force." Peter Gallo, the Lucchese acting boss, waved dismissively. "We're clean tonight. Nobody followed anybody. We swept for bugs. This house is secure. Stop being paranoid." But Anthony Palladino wasn't satisfied. "I'm just saying, maybe we should wrap this up. Get back to our hotels." Ricci stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "You questioning my security? You think I'd bring everyone here if it wasn't safe? You're just scared. That's what you are. Sit down and shut up." Palladino sat, but the damage was done. The mood in the room had shifted. People were looking around nervously. Someone mentioned that he'd seen helicopters earlier. Someone else said his driver had reported a lot of police activity near I-10. In the surveillance van, Chen made a decision. If the meeting broke up now, subjects would scatter. Some might escape. The operation would be compromised. He needed to move. Now. He keyed his radio. "All units, stand by. Prepare to execute on my command." On the walls of the Situation Room, monitors showed tactical teams readying weapons, helicopter pilots dropping altitude, perimeter teams starting engines. Inside the estate, Vinny Marchese felt the shift. People were standing, moving toward the door. If he didn't give the signal now, it would be too late. He cleared his throat and said loudly, "It's hot in here. I need some air." 5 words. The phrase that would end 27 years undercover and begin the largest Cosa Nostra takedown in a generation. The breach special agent Chen heard the signal and didn't hesitate. He keyed his radio and said one word: execute. At 9:06 p.m., 14 helicopters dropped from 1,500 feet to 800 feet and converged on the estate. The noise was sudden and overwhelming, a thundering roar that shook windows and set off car alarms across the neighborhood. Residents poured out of their houses, looking up in confusion. Some grabbed phones and started recording. Within seconds, social media lit up with speculation. Military exercise? Police chase? What's happening in Memorial? At the estate, the drivers outside looked up in alarm. One of them, a young Gambino associate named Michael Torino, reached for his phone to call inside. Before he could dial, 6 tactical operators emerged from the darkness, weapons raised, voices shouting, "FBI, hands up, get on the ground, now, now, now." The drivers froze. Some complied immediately, dropping to their knees with hands behind their heads. Others hesitated, looking toward the house, calculating odds. One driver, a Lucchese soldier named James Rossetti, turned and ran toward his BMW. He made it 4 steps before a 40mm foam baton round hit him in the back, dropping him instantly. Non-lethal, but incapacitating. 2 operators were on him in seconds, zip-tying his wrists behind his back. Within 90 seconds, all 17 exterior subjects were secured. 0 shots fired. 0 injuries beyond minor bruises. At the front door, the main entry team moved into position. The team leader, a veteran FBI agent named Marcus Williams, 38 years old, 14 years on SWAT, placed a breaching charge on the door's lock mechanism. Standard FBI procedure: minimal explosive force, precise placement, maximum efficiency. He keyed his radio. "Breach in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The charge detonated with a sharp crack. The door flew inward. 2 flashbang grenades sailed through the opening, detonating with blinding light and deafening noise. The operators flooded in, weapons up, voices overlapping in a controlled cacophony. "FBI, search warrant, get down, hands where we can see them, down, down, down." Inside, the reaction was chaos. Some subjects dropped immediately, hands up, recognizing the futility of resistance. Others backed away looking for exits. One Gambino captain, Robert Catalano, reached toward his waistband. An operator saw the movement and fired a taser. 2 probes hit Catalano in the chest, delivering 50,000 volts. He dropped, convulsing. Operators swarmed him, securing his hands and removing a Glock 26 from his waistband. At the rear of the house, the second entry team breached simultaneously. They encountered 4 subjects trying to escape through the kitchen. All 4 were secured within seconds. Vinny Marchese, standing in the main room, put his hands behind his head and dropped to his knees along with everyone else. He couldn't appear to be cooperating. Not yet. Not until he was safely in FBI custody. An operator zip-tied his wrists roughly, pushing his face against the marble floor. It hurt, but Vinny didn't complain. This was the price of his betrayal and his salvation. Within 4 minutes of the initial breach, all 72 subjects inside the estate were secured. Operators began the methodical process of identification, photographs, ID checks, cross-referencing with arrest warrant lists. Each subject was searched, processed, and moved to a staging area in the backyard, where buses waited to transport them to federal holding facilities. Meanwhile, across Houston, 13 simultaneous raids executed flawlessly. At a social club in Chinatown, agents arrested 3 Colombo associates. At a restaurant in Spring Branch, they seized financial records and arrested 2 Lucchese soldiers. At a warehouse near the port, they found $2.3 million in untaxed cigarettes and arrested 4 Gambino associates. By 9:30 p.m., all 89 subjects were in custody. 0 casualties, 0 escapes, 0 shots fired by law enforcement. In the surveillance van, Special Agent Chen removed his headphones and exhaled deeply. 4 years of work, 11 months of intensive planning, and it had taken less than 30 minutes to execute. His phone rang. It was the special agent in charge of the Houston field office. "Michael, it's done. All subjects accounted for. No injuries. The director wants to call you personally tomorrow morning. This is going to be huge." Chen nodded, but he wasn't thinking about accolades or press conferences. He was thinking about Vincent Marchese, who had just burned every bridge he'd ever built, who had just traded one life for another, who had just proven that even inside the darkness of organized crime, some people still choose the light. The aftermath. At 10:15 p.m., the buses departed the estate, carrying 72 subjects to the federal courthouse in downtown Houston, where they would be processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and held overnight pending arraignment. The remaining 17 subjects, those arrested at other locations, were transported to the same facility through separate routes. Vincent Marchese rode in an unmarked FBI sedan with Special Agent Chen. His zip-tie restraints had been removed. Someone handed him a bottle of water. He drank it in silence, staring out the window at Houston's glittering skyline. "You did good," Chen said quietly. Vinny didn't respond. What was there to say? He'd done what he had to do. Whether it was good or not, history would decide. At the federal courthouse, Vinny was taken to a secure floor reserved for high-value witnesses. His wife and daughters were already there, sitting in a conference room with a victim advocate. When Vinny entered, his youngest daughter, 15 years old, tears streaming down her face, ran to him. "Daddy? What's happening? They won't tell us anything." Vinny held her, feeling something break inside him. "We're going away for a while. Somewhere safe. I can't explain everything right now, but I promise you'll understand someday. And I promise I'm going to make things right." His wife, Maria, 49 years old, a woman who had spent 25 years married to a mobster without ever asking questions she didn't want answered, looked at him with an expression somewhere between betrayal and relief. She knew. She'd always known. And now, it was over. By midnight, the media had the story. Helicopters, raids, organized crime. It was irresistible. Local news ran breaking alerts. National outlets picked it up within an hour. By morning, it would be front-page news from Houston to New York. The FBI scheduled a press conference for 10 a.m. Saturday, November 2nd. The special agent in charge would present the basics. 89 arrests, 4 crime families, charges including RICO conspiracy, extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and narcotics distribution. Federal prosecutors would emphasize that this represented the largest single organized crime operation in Texas history. But some details wouldn't be shared. Santos' identity would remain protected. The specific surveillance techniques would stay classified. The full scope of the investigation, 4 years, hundreds of wiretaps, thousands of hours of surveillance, would be summarized in a single sentence. This operation represents years of dedicated investigative work by multiple law enforcement agencies. Stop here for a second. Vincent Marchese just made a choice that will define the rest of his life. He betrayed people he'd known for decades, people who trusted him, people who would now spend decades in prison because of him. Was he a hero for helping dismantle a criminal organization? Or was he a traitor who violated the code he'd lived by? There's no easy answer. What would you do in his position? Really think about it. Comment below. Let's have a real conversation about loyalty, justice, and the impossible choices people face. Act 3. The Reckoning. The Arraignment. On Monday, November 4, 2024, all 89 defendants appeared in federal court for arraignment. The courthouse in downtown Houston had never seen anything like it. Dozens of defendants in orange jumpsuits, shackled and guarded, filling multiple courtrooms. Families crowded the hallways, wives, mothers, children, all trying to understand what was happening. The charges were read: conspiracy to conduct racketeering activities in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1962. Each defendant faced a maximum sentence of 20 years. Additional charges, extortion, illegal gambling, loan sharking, carried separate penalties. Federal prosecutors, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Hendricks, laid out the government's case in a 174-page indictment. The document described a criminal enterprise spanning 4 states, operating for over a decade, generating an estimated $38 million annually in illegal profits. It detailed specific crimes: a construction worker extorted for $12,000 after falling behind on a loan, a bookmaker beaten for refusing to pay tribute, a restaurant owner forced to hire mob-connected suppliers at inflated prices. Defense attorneys, some court-appointed, others expensive private counsel, argued for bail. Judge Sarah Martinez, a 58-year-old Reagan appointee with a reputation for fairness and toughness, denied most requests. These defendants are part of a sophisticated criminal organization with extensive resources and international connections, she said. The risk of flight is substantial. 22 defendants accepted plea deals within the first month. They provided cooperation, testimony, and information in exchange for reduced sentences. The remaining 67 chose to fight, hiring teams of lawyers and preparing for trial. The investigation deepens. As defendants sat in federal detention, FBI analysts continued processing evidence seized during the raids. At the estate alone, agents recovered 47 cell phones, 12 laptops, financial documents, ledgers, and encrypted communication devices. Digital forensics teams spent weeks extracting data, breaking encryption, and reconstructing deleted files. What they found exceeded expectations. The Cosa Nostra network in Houston was more extensive than anyone realized. Financial records showed connections to legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, waste management firms, transportation services. The mob had infiltrated unions, corrupted public officials, and built relationships with politicians at the state and local levels. Special Agent Chen's team identified 14 businesses operating as fronts for criminal activity. They traced $18 million in wire transfers through shell companies in Delaware, Nevada, and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They found evidence of healthcare fraud, mobsters billing Medicare for services never provided, kickback schemes involving pharmacy benefits and medical equipment fraud totaling $4.2 million. In December 2024, the investigation expanded. Federal grand juries in Houston, New York, and Philadelphia issued additional indictments. 3 politicians, a Houston city councilman, a Harris County commissioner, and a state representative, were charged with accepting bribes from mob-connected businesses. A union official was indicted for extorting construction companies. The takedown sent shockwaves through organized crime families nationwide. In New York, Cosa Nostra leadership held emergency meetings, trying to understand how Houston had fallen so completely. Some blamed the bosses who'd approved the Texas expansion. Others blamed the captains who'd failed to detect the FBI investigation. But mostly they blamed Santo, the hunt for the informant. Within days of the arrests, word spread through the Cosa Nostra network. Someone had cooperated. Someone inside the meeting had worn a wire. The audio evidence was too detailed, too perfect. Someone had betrayed the life. Mob associates began analyzing who was missing from the arrests. Vincent Marchese's name came up quickly. He'd been at the meeting, surveillance photos confirmed it, but he wasn't in federal detention. His wife and daughters had disappeared. His house in Staten Island was empty. On December 10, 2024, the Colombo family held a trial in absentia. Vinnie Marchese was convicted of cooperating with law enforcement and sentenced to death. The family put out a $500,000 contract on Vinnie's life, payable to anyone who could locate and eliminate him. But Vinnie was already gone. The U.S. Marshals Service's Witness Security Program, commonly known as WITSEC, had relocated him and his family to an undisclosed location. New identities, new social security numbers, new lives. Vinnie Marchese ceased to exist. The man he became would never be revealed publicly. The marshals took extraordinary precautions. No contact with anyone from the past. No social media. No phone calls to old friends. Total separation. It's a kind of death, not physical, but psychological. You become someone else and the person you were is buried. Vinnie's wife struggled with the transition. She'd spent 25 years building a life in New York, friends, family, community. Now she was living in a city she'd never visited, surrounded by strangers, unable to explain who she was or where she'd come from. She attended therapy twice a week, processing grief for a life that was gone. Vinnie's daughters adapted better, as children often do. They enrolled in new schools under new names. They made new friends, they built new identities. The youngest sometimes asked about her cousins in New York, but those questions became less frequent over time. Vinnie himself was harder to read. He took a job. The marshals helped him find work that matched his skills without revealing his background. He went to work, came home, watched television. He spoke rarely about the past. When his wife asked if he regretted his decision, he said simply, "I'm alive. My family is safe. That's what matters." But late at night, Vinnie sometimes woke from dreams of the life he'd left. Dreams of weddings and funerals, of respect and fear, of belonging to something larger than himself. He'd betrayed that world, and even though he believed it was the right choice, the weight of that betrayal never fully lifted. The trials. The first trial began in March 2025. Federal prosecutors chose to try 8 defendants together, 2 acting bosses, 4 captains, and 2 soldiers. The trial lasted 7 weeks. The government called 47 witnesses, introduced 832 pieces of evidence, and played hours of audio recordings captured by Santo's wire. The defense strategy was predictable. Attack the credibility of cooperating witnesses, suggest that the FBI had entrapped defendants, argue that conversations about criminal activity were just bravado and exaggeration, not actual conspiracies. But the evidence was overwhelming. Jurors heard defendants discussing specific crimes in detail. They saw financial records showing illegal profits. They heard from victims, business owners who'd been extorted, workers who'd been threatened, bookmakers who'd been beaten. On May 2, 2025, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts for all 8 defendants. The 2 acting bosses, Thomas Ricci and Peter Gallo, were sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The 4 captains received sentences ranging from 12 to 18 years. The 2 soldiers got 10 years each. The convictions triggered a cascade of additional plea deals. Defendants facing trial looked at the evidence and realized they couldn't win. By July 2025, 58 of the remaining 59 defendants had accepted plea agreements. Only one, a stubborn Gambino captain named Robert Catalano, insisted on going to trial. He was convicted in September 2025 and sentenced to 15 years. The broader impact. The Houston takedown reshaped the landscape of organized crime in America. For decades, Cosa Nostra families had operated with relative impunity in cities outside the traditional FBI focus areas of New York, New Jersey, and Chicago. Houston, with its massive port and booming economy, had seemed like fertile ground for expansion. The operation proved otherwise. It demonstrated that the FBI could penetrate even the most sophisticated criminal organizations, that new surveillance technologies made traditional mob security measures obsolete, and that the code of silence, omerta, could be broken. In the year following the arrests, FBI field offices across the country reported similar patterns. Cosa Nostra families retreating from expansion plans, reducing their profiles, becoming more cautious. The Houston operation had created a chilling effect. If 89 made men could be arrested simultaneously in Texas, nowhere was safe. But the impact went beyond organized crime. The investigation exposed corruption in Houston's construction industry, where mob-connected companies had been winning contracts through bribery and intimidation. It revealed gaps in port security that had allowed millions of dollars in contraband to flow through the nation's busiest port. It showed how easily criminals could exploit legitimate businesses, unions, and even government agencies. In response, the Port of Houston Authority implemented new security protocols. The FBI expanded its organized crime task forces in Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin. The Texas legislature passed new laws increasing penalties for racketeering and creating special prosecutors for organized crime cases. The restaurant owner who'd been forced to buy from mob-connected suppliers testified before Congress about the economic impact of organized crime on small businesses. "They don't just steal money," he said. "They steal opportunity. They steal the American dream. Every dollar I paid in tribute was a dollar I couldn't invest in my employees, my restaurant, my community. The human cost." But behind the statistics and the prosecutions were human stories. Complicated, messy, and often tragic. Michael Torino, the young Gambino associate who'd been arrested outside the estate, was 26 years old with no prior convictions. He'd grown up in the life. His father was a made man. His uncle was a captain. He'd never known anything else. He accepted a plea deal and received 5 years. He'd be 31 when he was released, young enough to start over, old enough to understand what he'd lost. James Rossetti, the Lucchese soldier who'd tried to run, had 3 kids under the age of 10. His wife filed for divorce while he was awaiting trial. She told reporters, "I didn't know. I thought he was in construction. I thought we were a normal family." She was lying, or perhaps lying to herself. But her children were innocent, and they'd grow up with a father in prison and a stigma they didn't deserve. Frank Amato, Vinnie Marchese's captain, received 16 years. He was 58 at sentencing, which meant he'd likely die in prison. In a jailhouse interview with a reporter, he was asked about Vinnie's betrayal. "There's no honor anymore," he said. "Guys used to go to their graves before they'd rat. Now soon as they're looking at time, they cooperate." Vinnie was weak. I should have seen it. But weakness wasn't the right word. Vinnie had made a choice that required courage of a different kind. It's easy to maintain loyalty when the cost is abstract. It's harder when the cost is your freedom, your family, your future. The victims, those who'd been extorted, threatened, beaten, had mixed feelings about the prosecutions. Some felt vindicated. Others felt that justice came too late. A construction worker who'd been forced to pay $12,000 in extortionate interest told me, "I'm glad they got caught, but I'm never getting my money back. I'm never getting those years back when I was terrified every time I saw a black SUV on my street." That's the reality of organized crime. Even when justice prevails, the damage lingers. Special Agent Chen's reflection. In November 2025, exactly 1 year after the operation, I spoke with Special Agent Michael Chen at his office in Houston. He'd been promoted to Supervisory Special Agent, leading the entire organized crime program for the Houston field office. But he seemed tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying weight for too long. "People think this was a victory," he said. And it was. But it was also a reminder of how deep the problem goes. We arrested 89 people and dismantled 4 family operations. But organized crime didn't end. It adapted. There are already new players moving into the territory those guys controlled. Different faces, same game. I asked him about Santo, whether he ever thought about the man who'd made it all possible. Chen was quiet for a moment. "Every day," he finally said. "Vinnie gave up everything. His identity, his family's life. his sense of self. People call him a rat, a traitor, but I see him differently. He was a man who spent 27 years making bad choices, and then he made one good choice. That doesn't erase the past, but it matters. He saved lives. He prevented violence. He helped us dismantle something genuinely evil. Do you think he'd do it again? I asked. Chen smiled sadly. I think he wishes he'd never had to. I think he wishes he'd made different choices earlier, so that night in Houston never had to happen. But given the situation he was in, yeah, I think he'd do it again. Because at some point, you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. And Vinny decided he didn't want to be that person anymore. Where they are now. As of December 2025, all 89 defendants have been sentenced. The shortest sentence was 3 years for a low-level associate who cooperated extensively. The longest was 20 years for the 2 acting bosses. Special Agent Michael Chen continues leading organized crime investigations in Houston. He's working on new cases, human trafficking, cybercrime, transnational criminal organizations. The work never ends. Vincent Marchese lives somewhere in America under a name no one knows. He'll never attend another family wedding. He'll never visit his mother's grave in Brooklyn. He'll never be the person he was. But he's alive, and his family is safe, and perhaps that's enough. The estate where the meeting took place was seized by the federal government under asset forfeiture laws. It was sold at auction in June 2025 for $2.8 million. The proceeds went to a victims' compensation fund. The 14 helicopters that circled Houston that night returned to routine operations: border patrol, medical transport, law enforcement support. The pilots probably don't think much about November 1st, 2024. For them, it was just another operation. But for the people involved, the agents, the defendants, the victims, the families, that night changed everything. The deeper questions. The Houston operation raises questions that don't have easy answers. Questions about loyalty and betrayal, about justice and revenge, about whether the ends justify the means. Was it right to pressure Vincent Marchese into cooperation by threatening him with decades in prison? He'd committed crimes, real crimes that hurt real people. But he'd also spent his entire adult life in a culture that demanded loyalty above all else. Breaking that code required tremendous courage, but it also made him the thing he'd been raised to despise. Was the operation proportionate? 14 helicopters, 120 law enforcement officers, years of investigation, millions of dollars spent, all to arrest 89 men involved in gambling, loan sharking, and extortion. Serious crimes, yes. But in a nation with limited resources and countless other threats, was this the best use of federal power? And what about the families? The children of convicted mobsters didn't choose their father's profession. They didn't commit crimes. But they'll live with the stigma forever. They'll grow up knowing their fathers chose criminality over fatherhood. Is that justice, or is it just another form of punishment? These questions don't have answers. Or rather, they have many answers depending on your perspective. A victim of extortion sees justice. A defense attorney sees government overreach. A child sees abandonment. A prosecutor sees necessary deterrence. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The Houston operation was both a triumph of law enforcement and a reminder of the human cost of crime and its prosecution. It was both necessary and tragic. It solved some problems and created others. The final word. On a warm evening in November 2025, I stood outside the estate where the operation took place. The house has new owners now, a software entrepreneur and his family, people who have no connection to what happened here a year ago. The lawn is still manicured. The fountain still runs. Nothing visible remains of that night. But if you know where to look, you can see the scars. Small repairs in the door frame where breaching charges detonated. A section of fence that's slightly newer than the rest where the rear entry team cut through. Subtle marks that tell a story to those who know how to read them. I thought about all the people whose lives intersected here. The agents who spent years building the case. The mobsters who thought they were untouchable. The informant who betrayed everything he knew. The victims who finally saw justice. The families trying to rebuild. I thought about Special Agent Chen's words. At some point, you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. That's the real lesson of the Houston takedown. Not that crime doesn't pay, though it doesn't. Not that the FBI always wins, though in this case, they did. But that every person, at some point in their life, faces a choice between who they've been and who they want to become. Vincent Marchese made that choice. It cost him everything he'd built over 27 years. It gave him something he'd never had, the possibility of redemption. Whether that trade was worth it, only Vinny can say. But he made the choice, and he'll live with the consequences for the rest of his life. 89 men went to prison because of one man's decision to cooperate. Dozens of families were shattered. A criminal network that had operated for over a decade was dismantled. The Port of Houston became more secure. Small businesses were freed from extortion. And somewhere in America, under a name no one knows, a man tries to sleep without dreaming of the life he destroyed and the lives he saved. That's justice. Imperfect, complicated, costly, and necessary. That's the Houston takedown.